Okay, welcome everyone. I want to welcome you to the July meeting of the Azure Group. Let's take a look at the slides. We're going to go through a brief introduction to the group for those folks who are here for the first time. Again, we'll try not to drag it out. We'll talk about the mission, the history of the group, how we're having meetings, who's on the board, sponsors and sponsorship opportunities, our YouTube channel, which the video this meeting will be posted within a few days, and wrap up with tonight's meeting. So this is the group mission. We're everything Microsoft Azure, infrastructure, development, management, you name it. We've had talks in all different areas, and all kinds of people attend. Everything from an occasional manager, CTO, to developers, to system administrators. Okay, so it really is an eclectic group. We were founded in 2013 with only 4 members, and we built the group up now to over 2,000. In fact, I think we got about 2,500 registered members. But that doesn't mean we don't need more. All right, so tell your friends and coworkers about us, and we'll get them into the group. We currently are meeting online only. Lately, when we get to the end, I'll show there's going to be a change to this, but we're currently meeting online on the third Thursday of the month through Zoom. We start with this group overview and follow up with the main meeting topic. Let us know what topics you're interested in. I always like the people that attend a meeting to have preference to suggesting topics. So if there's a topic that you think the group should cover, let us know. And also, if you want to cover a topic, let us know that as well. I know we've had good luck getting people from our group to attend and present. I know a couple of guys are here already, so we've had good luck with that. Board of directors is myself. I'm the founder and president. I'm an Azure Solutions architect. Roger Dahlman is the co-founder and vice president, and he's an enterprise architect at Deloitte in the daytime. Tim Warner is someone you probably know. Tim is a very well-known Pluralsight author and book author that's headquartered here in Nashville. He no longer works for Microsoft, so I have to take that line out. Microsoft Azure Documentation Specialist. Tim has gone back to Pluralsight. So he spent some time at Microsoft, then went back to Pluralsight. And Jack Hagler is our specialist from VACO. Jack provides all kinds of support for the group, including gotta be able to talk. The Zoom subscription that we're using now, that VACO actually pays for that for us. Sponsors, we've got plenty of sponsors. We've got Microsoft, who pays for our meetup dues. VACO, as I said, who provides our Zoom subscription. And we're also sponsored by the Greater Nashville Technology Council. And we're working on a sponsorship with A Cloud Guru, a training site. Kind of like Pluralsight, but not exactly. But anyway, it's a site that we're trying to come up with a sponsorship program, maybe get some discounts on subscriptions and things like that. We always could use sponsors. Again, if you want to have 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning of a meeting to promote your company or service, let us know. And if you want to raffle off prizes, gift certificates, products, whatever, we're obviously in the mood for that too, especially because soon we're going to be going back to having on-site meetings. Okay. So if you're interested in co-sponsoring a future meeting, give Roger Dahlman a call and talk to him about it. This is our YouTube channel. As you can see, we have a lot of videos out there from previous meetings, a few that I've done, but mostly videos that I've gotten from the community and various people. Okay. Upcoming meetings. We're making a change to our meeting format. We've been meeting online only for about, I would say, almost 6 months now, but we want to go back to having people come to an on-site meeting, because frankly, there's no substitute for getting together with your peers and networking and in some cases, talking to recruiters, and really, there's opportunities that you just can't have when you're meeting, online. So we're going to be having a major relaunch of the group, and we're going to go to an on-site plus hybrid approach, where those people who are in the Nashville area can come to the meeting. Those folks who are outside of the Nashville area will still have the meeting streamed, so they can attend as well. And I'll be putting out an announcement next week about more information about what we're doing. We're also actually, by the way, changing from a Thursday night meeting to a Wednesday night meeting. But again, that'll all be in the announcement. Okay, before we start, we have a special announcement. We have someone who wants to give a presentation, a short presentation. Doug, do you want to do that? Can you do it? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you give me presenter real quick?
Yes. Now I
okay, if you don't mind.
Let me give you a co-presenter.
Okay. Got a little short video to introduce it. It's less than a minute, and then I'll get into some more details.
Okay, you're a co-host. You should be able to share.
Okay, let me see here. Oh, where's that share button? Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, share screen. And I want to share this. Okay, now where's the share sound button? There we go. Screen 2. Okay, can you see my screen? It's the media player.
Okay, it's black right now.
Yeah, but down at the bottom, you should be able to see the controls.
Oh yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, yeah, I see the buttons. Let me move this stuff out of the way here for me.
So there's a new Azure group in town, and I've already talked to Bill about this. I'm not trying to compete with him, but Azure is just it's a flagship Microsoft product, and it doesn't have a really strong voice in Memphis, which is where I am, about 3 hours to the west. So I this past Monday launched. I've been working on this actually for several weeks, but I launched it this past Monday. And we're going to have our first meeting in September. And so we've got a website, memphisazure.com. If you go over to talks, you'll see that I've got the first 3 folks already lined up. I am talking to a designer, trying to bribe her to redo this to make it look, so that the logo doesn't take up half of the screen. But however, so we're going to start in September. Like I said, first Monday of each month, September 4th. Chad Green, who's an Azure MVP, he's going to be presenting an overview of Azure. And in fact, if you go to that talk, you can get the link for the meetup page right here. In fact, we got 15 folks already, so not bad for having announced it just 72 hours ago. Then the next month in October, we're going to have Sean Whitesell, who's also an MVP, but he's an Azure Certified Solutions Architect. He's going to be talking about creating your first Azure applications. And then in November, Matt Eland, who's an AI MVP, is going to be talking about automating my dog with Azure Cognitive Services, which does not exist anymore because earlier this week they rebranded it to Azure AI Services. So we're going to have to update that. And then I'm talking to some other folks, and if anybody is interested in speaking to the group or has a topic they would like to present, Sven, hint, hint, you can reach me at douglas@memphisazure.com. We are on Twitter at Memphis Azure, and we are on YouTube at at Memphis Azure as well.
And then
So
there's a question in the
oh,
chat.
there is a question. Oh my gosh, such a short presentation. I didn't think that there would be. Wow, are you hosting at the FedEx Institute? No, right now it is virtual only. And I'm hoping to go hybrid someday, but if we go hybrid, we'll be at the Microsoft office because they've got really good video conferencing facilities there. Also, we don't have to pay to park at the Microsoft office, and University of Memphis charges us $3 an hour. They won't give us parking passes. So if they want, if they want our business, we're gonna have to get something in return. And the Microsoft office is much, much nicer.
Okay.
So thanks a lot, Bill, and I'll get out of
Yeah.
your way now. So hope to
Yeah,
see everybody there.
sure.
And I will relinquish the screen.
Let me turn the floor over to Sven.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And Doug, yeah, I love to reuse talks, so no worries.
Okay.
I'll show up, and also don't be in a rush to change the name of that talk in November. That's still like 4 months out. The name could change again by the time that talk comes out. So
possibly so. Well, hit me up, and I'll be we can hit me up and we can get you on the schedule.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay. All right. So, good evening, everyone. I have to say, 17 people on the call right now. No, sorry, 19 people on the call right now is honestly a little more than I expected. There aren't too many people excited at 6 o'clock Central Time on a Thursday evening to talk about Azure policy and regulatory compliance. So kudos to all of you for showing up and taking this seriously here. You can see this dude isn't too enthusiastic. He just found out his company is going to get audited, and his Azure policy compliance screen isn't looking too good, and so he's looking for some help. And maybe I'll be able to avoid you from looking like that if you ever need to get your compliance house in order. So it's a pleasure for me to be here, Bill. Thank you for having me back, and want to encourage everyone to ask questions during the presentation. I will be monitoring the chat. As well as I can, can look at the chat screen, but also feel free to come off mute. This isn't too big of an audience, so we can definitely keep it informal here. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself, but before I do that, I thought maybe I would start by introducing what we'll talk about and what I'm going to talk about and what you might have questions about. So the first thing I want to do is kind of position, right, why I think this worth for you to spend an hour or so listening to me about this and seeing some demos as well. Then we'll talk about some of the tooling in Azure that relates to to compliance, excuse me. And then we'll talk about how you can develop a plan for getting compliant. Now, the reason why you should develop a plan is probably going to become pretty obvious as I go through my talk. But the bottom line is that I've worked with a large number of customers and about compliance. And the first time I look at, some of their regulatory compliance, there's a lot of red there. Okay. And so we'll talk about how we can get rid of that. And a lot of the things that we're going to be addressing will be with have to do with technical controls, and so we'll focus a little bit on that as well. And like I said, I certainly want to leave time at the end for Q&A, but if you have a question throughout the presentation, let's hear that. I also think it's important to kind of level set and clearly come out and say, well, here's what I won't explicitly address. One thing is going to be policy as code. Infrastructure as code may be familiar to some of you. Was very similar concept as policy as code. You can, in fact, take your policy for Azure and codify that as JSON files and manage them in a source control repository and deploy them with a GitOps kind of approach. That's not what I'm going to be talking about. Not that you couldn't do what I'm, going to talk about here with policy as code. It's just that that's outside of the scope of this particular talk here. Also out of scope is hybrid and multi-cloud compliance. Again, a lot of things that I'm going to be talking about will absolutely apply in hybrid and multi-cloud environments, but not really what I'm going to focus on here. Now, there's also the whole concept about remediation. If you're not entirely familiar with remediation, I'm talking about remediation tasks. That has, it's not very detailed, but again, a little bit outside of what I'm going to go talk about. I'm not planning to talk about manual attestations, but I'm actually pretty excited about that. So maybe I'll forget I said that, and I'll show it anyway. And then the final thing, Azure Blueprints, again, very interesting capabilities in Azure Blueprints, but outside of the scope of what I want to address here today. And yes, Jeff, absolutely, you are correct. However, we're not just given up on those capabilities. And by the way, Jeff's comment in the chat is about an announcement that blueprints are being deprecated and will never make it out of public preview. Yes, indeed. So that is correct, but we're not just dropping the concepts, right? Because the concepts behind Azure Blueprints are really good concepts, and they're very valid in my opinion. And so we're actually replacing that, in the replacement technology that's currently in public preview is called deployment stacks. Largely, well, there's some other things there too, template specifications and so on. But deployment stacks is kind of the next thing for blueprints, and maybe that's a topic for a future talk for the users group. All right. So like I said, just very briefly, a little bit about me. Bill mentioned, I think in the opening slide, I work at Microsoft, cloud solution architect. I work with US education institutions. One thing to note is that even though I'm at Microsoft, opinions that I express here today are all mine and do not necessarily reflect those of Microsoft or any of my colleagues. I do live in Nashville, Tennessee. Maybe by the accent you can tell that I'm not a native. I actually spent about 19 years before moving to Nashville in Southeast Alabama, but originally I'm from Belgium. And over the years, I've had the opportunity to do a few different things, and including some book authoring. And if the book titles aren't too much of an eye test, you might see they all have to do with SQL Server. It kind of feels like a past life now, but that was a big part of what I used to work with, was Microsoft SQL Server. And in spare time I have picked up flight simulation as a hobby again. I had dropped that for about 20 years, but I'm actually very pleased to get back into that. But let's talk about the actual topic of the day. And so the talk here is going to combine Azure Policy and regulatory compliance in Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which is really based all on Azure Policy. So I think it's important that we first talk about, what are some of the base elements and concepts of Azure Policy. So Azure Policy 101, here we go. The idea behind policy, Azure Policy in particular, is that you want to have the ability to determine if the Azure resources that you have deployed are adhering to corporate standards, and perhaps more importantly, even industry or regulatory requirements. And when I'm talking about industry and regulatory requirements, we're thinking of things like HIPAA, PCI DSS, NIST 800 171 or NIST 853, and so on. So Azure Policy can help you determine whether you're compliant, and can also help you enforce standards so that hopefully there's no drift from your particular compliance posture. So how does it do that? Well, it begins by defining policy definitions. And now Azure comes with, I'm just going to say, a very large number of built-in policy definitions. I honestly don't know how many there are. It's a significant number that are available for all kinds of Azure resource types. Okay, so for example, if you deploy a storage account, there's any number of Azure policy definitions that you can use to either determine or enforce specific settings on a storage account, right? But it can also apply at the subscription level, or it can apply to a manual attestation. So not even something today anymore that is related to an actual Azure resource, but just to an organizational or a policy control that your organization is supposed to have in place. Okay? So I don't want you to think about it only as technical controls that apply to Azure resources. because like I mentioned in the opening slide, I don't want to go too deeply into this, but this does apply in a hybrid environment, it does apply in a multi-cloud environment, and it applies also for manual controls. Okay, but again, today I'll focus primarily on the technical controls and on technical controls that apply to Azure resources. So in the green shaded boxes, I've highlighted a few of the policy definitions, that I commonly encounter customers are interested in. And so there's a couple there, right? Starting at the top, disallowed resources. And by the way, this is not the full name of the policy definition. I kind of abbreviated it. Requiring HTTPS to access Azure storage accounts, and setting specific regions where a deployment might be allowed. And when we think about the total number, and by the way, I have a little cheat website that I'm going to share you the URL with at the end of the presentation. So this way, I kind of know you'll stick around for the whole time. A little cheat website. According to that website, there are 3,493 policy definitions available in Azure today. So, thousands of policy definitions. Now, what you don't want to do probably is going in and assigning hundreds of individual policy definitions. So what we also have in Azure Policy is the capability to group those together and assign them as a unit. Now, those are then called policy initiatives. In some instances, especially if you kind of crack open the JSON definitions of these policy initiatives, you're also going to see them called policy sets. So policy sets, policy initiatives, same thing. So the policy definition is going to determine what is allowed or not allowed, or how a particular Azure resource is going to be constrained. Okay, policy initiative can be used to group policy definitions together, because those definitions and those initiatives are literally nothing more than a specification of what something can look like, right? But that doesn't mean it already is taking effect in your environment. In order for a policy definition or a policy initiative to take effect, you have to turn it into a policy assignment. So there's a step you take once you have identified policy definitions or initiatives that you would like to use. You go and assign them. And policy assignments have a couple of concepts associated with them as well. Namely, they have a scope. Okay, the scope of the policy assignment, that is the level in the Azure hierarchy where those policies are going to take effect. And you can apply a policy at the management group level, at the subscription level, or the resource group level. And by the way, I wasn't pointing this out this time here, but so we've moved here to the center section of the diagram in the purple shaded areas, policy assignments. Okay. Now, in addition to the scope, you can also define exclusions. Now, actually, exclusions are tightly related to the scope, because if you think of, let's say, the highest scope you could apply a policy assignment to would be your root management group or your tenant root group. And when you apply a policy there, perhaps unsurprisingly, that means that it's going to trickle down through all the child management groups, through all the subscriptions, and through all the resource groups, and apply, to all of the Azure resources that policy has something to do with. Now, again, maybe a storage account. But that may not necessarily be appropriate, right? You may want to say, as a general rule in our environment, this is what we want to enforce, but you may also have to allow for exceptions. Now, there's multiple ways to create exceptions. One of the ways to do it is by creating an exclusion on the policy assignment. And the exclusion is essentially going to say, well, I want this policy assignment to operate at this level, which will, like I said before, automatically trickle down to all of its children of that level, right? But then you can also say, hey, except for here, okay? I want to exclude a particular path or a particular subtree of this hierarchy from this policy. Now, at the policy assignment level, you can also choose to turn enforcement on or off. When you think about that initially, maybe you think, well, why would I make a policy assignment and then turning enforcement off? Well, the reason for that is that, as I've kind of hinted at before, you can use policy to audit the state of your Azure resources. But you can also use Azure Policy to enforce a certain configuration of those resources. Now, that means that if a resource is out of compliance according to that policy, that the policy engine would bring it into compliance. But that may not be what you want to do initially. For example, if we're dealing with a brownfield environment, in other words, an environment that already exists, then if you go in and take a policy initiative, such as the NIST 800-171 policy initiative, you go and apply that to the existing environment and you turn on enforcement, there are almost certainly going to be some resources that are out of compliance, and the policy engine might automatically go and fix them. Now, again, that kind of goes into remediation, but the idea is that you may not want that to happen because you could break something, right? Or you start enforcing a new policy, and maybe your organization hasn't really had a chance yet to modify how their deployments work. So now all of a sudden you might have automated deployments that start to fail because they're not meeting those policy requirements. So that's why you can essentially apply a policy initiative or a definition in a phase where enforcement is turned off, gives you a chance to fix what is going on, right? And then turn enforcement on as a second level. And then another aspect of policy assignment are effects and parameters. And I think those things are kind of best explained as we walk through. So I'll show you a demo in just a little bit, and we will talk a little bit more about that. Now, of course, you do not need to have just one policy assignment. You can have many policy assignments at many different levels throughout your Azure hierarchy, and that is, of course, completely fine and completely normal. Now, one other thing I'll point out that I've highlighted here at the top of the diagram are exemptions. And so exemptions are yet another way to create an exception to a policy assignment, but that's where we are, well, generally speaking, more operating at the resource level. And also, the difference with an exclusion is that when you have an exclusion, you're actually saying that this policy should not apply at that particular level where you've defined that exclusion. When you create an exemption, now, and I'll admit, part of this is conceptually, right? In many cases, you can definitely create exclusions and exemptions, and treat them kind of interchangeably. But conceptually, you would use an exclusion if you say this particular part of my Azure environment should not be subject to this compliance. Okay? When you have an exemption, you say, well, yes, this part of my Azure environment, including an individual resource, it's actually it should be compliant, but for whatever reason, we are unable to meet the compliance requirement right now, or maybe even in the, any foreseeable future. And then you can create an exemption. And when you create an exemption, and again, I'll show this momentarily, but when you create an exemption, you can actually choose between a waiver or a mitigation type of exemption. And again, largely that is kind of nomenclature, but a waiver is whereby you are saying, I'm willing to accept the risk that comes with exempting this requirement. And if you use a mitigation, you're actually saying, well, this resource or this part of my Azure hierarchy is actually meeting the policy requirements. We're just doing it in a different way than what Azure policy understands. And I'll come up with some examples of that as well as we go through the demo. So hopefully this was a good level setting of what Azure policy consists of, the definitions that you can group into initiatives, And by the way, in addition to there being built-in policy definitions, there are also tons of built-in policy initiatives. You don't have to start making your own policy initiatives. Then you're going to create policy assignments. Those are going to determine where and how the policy is going to take effect. And there's also the concept of exemptions. And actually, more recently, we've also now had overrides and so on, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but I couldn't find a really good way to squeeze that into this diagram and still make it reasonably understandable. Again, just a reminder, please feel free to come off mute or post a chat question if you have anything. Oh, and there's a question. Mohibul, policy be applicable for new resources and old resources as well? Yes, that is an important question. So let me take a moment to answer that right now. So the moment that I am creating a policy assignment, the policy engine is immediately going to, or almost immediately, going to evaluate all of the existing resources for compliance with that policy. When I create a new resource in a resource group that is subject to that policy assignment, the policy engine is also immediately going to evaluate, even before I create that new resource, the compliance stature. And so that's when enforcement becomes important. With new resources, if enforcement is turned on, but the new resource does not meet the policy requirement, then I will not be able to create that new resource. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. So in short, the answer is yes, it's applicable to new and older resources as well. You know, in audit mode or when enforcement mode is turned off, right? Then I will, you know, just essentially see that something is out of compliance. With enforcement mode on, for new resource deployments, it is actually going to prevent me from making a deployment that would violate my policy definition. Okay, so next question is from Jeff. What permissions are required to submit an exemption to a policy? Is there a specific RBAC group provided to do this if at the sub or management group level? Jeff, that is a good question. And I have to admit, off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that right now. So there's definitely RBAC permissions that are built in that deal with the management of policy assignments and so on. I don't know if there are predefined roles that, you know, group some of these permissions together to make them easy to assign. But we'll find out once I go into the demo environment. We can take a look and see what RBAC roles are predefined. You know, in general, the permissions that are required, yeah, so, you know, owner, of course, would have them. Contributor is going to be more limited. Okay, so let's find out in a moment. All right. Now, so on the next slide here, want to just briefly talk about regulatory compliance and Defender for Cloud. So Defender for Cloud is essentially our cloud security posture management, workload protection. It's a number of, you know, kind of buzzwords when it comes to cloud security together. But it's a comprehensive set of tools that, and again, not just for Azure, not just for cloud, you know, it works multi-cloud and it works in hybrid environments as well. And the regulatory compliance piece in particular of Defender for Cloud leverages all of the concepts that we've just finished talking about for Azure Policy. But this regulatory compliance is essentially a set of work that has been done by groups at Microsoft that have combed through these regulatory compliance frameworks, you know, and again, there's so many of them that are available in Azure now. I just listed a few of the ones that I commonly encounter in my day-to-day job. So these people have gone and combed through the requirements for being compliant with those frameworks and with those regulatory environments, and they have looked at what technical controls exist in Azure that can help you, you know, remain compliant with that. And so they've created those policy, well, in some cases they've created policy definitions, of course, but most importantly, they've created the policy initiatives that group all of the available controls together. Okay. Now, I used to say that, well, these are technical controls, but like I said a little bit earlier, today you can actually also find the entire suite of organizational controls, procedural controls, right, that you have to have in place to remain compliant. Now, the Microsoft Defender for Cloud doesn't know that you have a system security plan in place, right? So it can't automatically determine whether you're in compliance with that or not. So there is a concept of excuse me, there's a concept of a manual attestation that's going to play a role in there. And again, don't want to focus too much on that. Want to focus on the technical controls here. Now, for you to take advantage, my apologies for that. For you to take advantage of the regulatory compliance features in Defender for Cloud, it does require you to enable the paid, well, I should say at least one pay to Defender for Cloud plan on your subscription or on multiple subscriptions. Okay, so this is going to be a case of do as I say and don't do what I do, because if this is a screenshot, not one from today, so it could have gotten worse since I took this screenshot of my particular Azure Policy homepage, or not page, but pane of showing compliance, right? So for example, Azure Policy is telling me that out of 65 resources that I have deployed, that only 22 of them are fully compliant with the policies that have been assigned. And that in total, I have assigned 3,654 policy definitions, and there's 220 of them that are non-compliant. Now, those numbers at first glance may not seem to add up, but the idea, of course, is that a single Azure resource could be non-compliant with multiple policy definitions at the same time. Okay. Also, you might say, well, I thought you said there were only 3,493 policy definitions available. How come there's 3,654 showing here? So again, that has a lot to do with some of the manual ones that aren't included in the in the technical controls. That is a 3,400 and a bit number. All right. You can also see that, for example, here I had assigned 17 initiatives, right? So these 3,654 policy definitions are grouped in 17 initiatives, and 13 of them are non-compliant, right? That doesn't mean that I'm non-compliant with every definition in those 13 initiatives, but at least one definition in each of those 13 initiatives I'm non-compliant with. And then there's another view you can get once you drill down into a particular policy assignment. You'll actually see, right, well, which policies are you not compliant with? Is this environment not compliant with? So that's a drill down functionality. All right, so let's take a look at that. Oh, hang on, to do that. So I'm going to switch to my web browser. All right, and I'll talk just briefly about Defender for Cloud, since that's the screen that I have pulled up here. And so the first thing I want to show you, right, is that Defender for Cloud, when you get to this homepage here, by default, you will have the entire set of your subscriptions that are in your global filter visible. Okay, and that could lead to a situation where you can't see the forest for the trees. So if you are looking to scope the sorry, I didn't mean to click on that quite yet. That means that if you're looking to scope down your view of Defender for Cloud and your regulatory compliance, your security posture, and so on, you can actually use the subscription filters to make this happen. Okay. Usually what I end up doing is I click on the directories and subscriptions button at the top. You can also click here on the subscriptions, literally takes you to the same place. And so you can use your subscription filters So for example, if I want to look at my core resources, then instead of 10 subscriptions, I've now narrowed it down to the 3, which, you know, potentially are the 3 most important ones for me, let's say. And so now everything, the active recommendations, the assessed resources, everything has been scoped down. So first thing to know. Second thing to know is that, as I've mentioned earlier, in order to take advantage of the regulatory compliance features for a particular subscription, you must have enabled at least one of the Defender for Cloud plans on that subscription. And that is something that you can do by going to the environment settings. And when I go into my environment settings, you're going to see here that, well, if I can scroll down successfully, let me try that again. So in my environment settings, no, I cannot seem to scroll down there. Okay, that was unexpected. Let me see what's going on here. Okay, yeah, so interesting. I usually use a slightly bigger monitor, and so I think that the zoom level was a little high, so I couldn't see the scroll bar there. So I zoomed out a little bit. I know this may be a little small to see. I'll zoom in again momentarily. But so I see a few things at the top here, right? Again, the same filter, for example, about 3 subscriptions. But what matters here is when I scroll down at the bottom, I will see, in this case, my Azure hierarchy of management groups represented. Right, and eventually I will get to the subscription level, such as, for example, those 3 subscriptions here. And you'll see here, in my case, I've enabled all 13 available Defender for Cloud plans. Again, you only need to have enabled at least one to take advantage of regulatory compliance. And if you want to know how to enable these plans, once you're in environment settings, you can click on the name of the subscription here, or you can go over to the right-hand side to the ellipsis and click on Edit Settings. And then you'll see the list of Defender plans for you. And you can, excuse me. So I'll just briefly share that I was on a trip just a few weeks ago, and I brought home some kind of a bug, and I'm still feeling the side effects of that a little bit. Anyhow, so as I was saying, when you go into the settings for a subscription, you will see the list of available Defender for Cloud plans, and you can turn them on and off individually. You know, I don't want to go too deeply into this. Don't ignore the fact that each of these plans also may have detailed settings available that are absolutely going to be important in how those Defender for Cloud plans are actually going to act within your environment. But at least one should be on in order to take advantage of regulatory compliance. So once you have that enabled, you can click on the regulatory compliance area. And what you're going to find here is that I have enabled several, yes, I just realized I went to the wrong, well, let me show this first. So even if you go there and you haven't really done anything, by default, everyone is going to have the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark available. The Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark is the new name for what used to be known as the Azure Security Benchmark, or the ASB. So now it's called the MCSB. So you're going to have that by default. And by the way, this benchmark, or this regulatory compliance experience, does actually not require you to have a paid plan. This is included without any extra paid plans. But if you want to go ahead and add additional ones, right, then you'll have to enable them. And you'll want to go here to manage compliance policies again. And let's go back to this, we don't necessarily have to do at a subscription level, by the way. But on the left-hand side in the settings, we can go to security policy, and you'll find that there's going to be one policy initiative that is going to be treated as the default one. Generally speaking, that is going to be the Azure Security Baseline if your environment has been around for a while, or now it's going to be called the Microsoft Cloud Security Baseline. But then on top of that, when you scroll down a little bit, that's where you're going to see industry and regulatory standards. There's a few of the top ones that are listed just here. Easily visible, but when you click on add more standards, then you'll have access to the entire catalog of standards. And, like I've mentioned, NIST 853 R5 is here, NIST 80171 is here. There's HIPAA High Trust. There's somewhere PCI DSS version 4 is here, and so on. Okay, and of course, in order to enable it, I would click the add button. Now, I'm not going to add something right now. What I'm going to do instead is back out a little bit and change my subscription filter again, because I picked the wrong one originally, which is why I didn't have any custom policies assigned yet. But now that I've switched my context for Defender for Cloud, you see that I not only have the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, I also have HIPAA High Trust, the NIST 80171 R2, and FedRAMP Moderate. So for each of these, I can go ahead and click on HIPAA High Trust, for example, and that is going to take a moment to load, and it's going to show me an exhaustive overview of what HIPAA High Trust controls are available. And remember, for many of these regulatory compliance frameworks now, there are not only technical controls available anymore, but there are also controls available that are manual controls. And let's see, maybe I'll need to go ahead and find the particular ones where that's the case. Actually, this one should be a fairly easy one. Or not, hang on, let me switch to, let's say, FedRAMP Moderate. I think it'll have the organization that I'm used to. There we go. So a couple of items here. So the language that is used here, access control, AC access control, AC1, access control policy and procedures, that language is taken directly from the associated regulatory compliance framework. So this is not someone at Microsoft who decided to group controls by access control. No, this comes directly from the FedRAMP Moderate framework, which in itself is based on NIST 853. Then you can go to the control details. You're going to have a textual description there of the control, the overview. Again, this comes directly from the compliance standards. Okay? And in most cases, there's going to be a link where you can learn more about the compliance standard as a whole. Now, what's always important, you've probably heard this before if you've worked with any kind of cloud environment for a while, is that when it comes to security and compliance in a cloud environment, there's a shared responsibility, right? Some of the tasks are going to be done by the cloud provider, right? But other tasks, just like as we're in an on-premises environment, they are still your responsibility. And so for each of these controls, this is actually outlined right here. So it's going to tell you that your actions, the customer's responsibility is, and in this case, they're all 4 manual, but we'll look at some other examples momentarily. Right? They're going to say, okay, well, this is what you need to do. You need to develop access control policies and procedures. Then you need to enforce mandatory and discretionary access control policies and so on. And by the way, we've even taken the time, and when I say we, that's not literally me, but this group at Microsoft who goes through these compliance frameworks, right, have even taken the time to provide actionable guidance on what to do when you click on those details. And then, of course, like I said, as part of the shared responsibility model, right, there are certain things that your cloud provider is going to do. And so therefore, we are going to attest that we are doing these things that are in our control. Now, not only are we going to attest this, in most cases, and especially, for example, in the case of FedRAMP Moderate, right, we actually are audited by third parties. And so we are going to tell you that the last time that we were assessed for FedRAMP Moderate was on December 7th, 2022. And it's going to even tell you how Azure is meeting those controls. So this is all very important information, right? Now I want to dig a little bit deeper and go into some of the technical controls, right? So let's see, maybe we can go, no, this is still manual. Okay, clearly I don't know all these frameworks by heart, right? So here we go. So I've drilled down into remote access. Then there's a subsection for remote access. There's additional assessments for remote access. And let's see, I'll pick on one here. You know, FedRAMP moderates and a lot of other ones require you, you know, to use private link. Now, I want to clarify this just a little bit because I just said FedRAMP moderate requires you to use private link. I've made a leap here, right, from what the FedRAMP moderate compliance framework says you should do to secure remote access, and then of course what the Microsoft team determined what technical controls are available to help you meet that requirement. Okay? So what I'm trying to stress here, I guess, is that you may very well have other ways to meet the additional assessments for remote access controls in FedRAMP moderate, right? It's just Microsoft, the group at Microsoft saying, hey, this is a really good way to do this, okay? From a technical control perspective. You can see that I'm actually, again, case of do as I say, not do as I do, because it says container registries should use private link. I have a container registry in my environment, but it does not use private link. Okay. Now, I've talked earlier about, you know, what can we do about this? So one of the things, right, that I've talked about was we can create an exemption. Okay, so I can see here that there is a particular container registry. I can see the subscription that it's in, and so what you know, what can I do with that? Well, there's let's see, I think there should be, okay, no. Sorry, I said I was going to zoom in again, so let me go ahead and do that. Make sure everyone can see it. So I can say, you know, this is important and this should be remediated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign an owner to this. So this is really where the regulatory compliance infrastructure in Defender for Cloud, right? Even with something, you know, that either may have to be done manually, or in this case, it's a technical control, right? But someone is going to have to take some action to configure this container registry to meet that requirement. So I can say that in my environment, I am going to see, I think I have someone called, oh, that's not what I meant to do. Someone called Kelsey. Okay, it's not liking Kelsey. Let's see if I can find Ashley. Okay, we'll pick on Ashley. That Ashley is responsible for that. And when Ashley is responsible for that, I'll even tell Ashley that, you know what, I'm going to give you 2 weeks to get compliant with this. Of course, we'll notify the owner. And if in my organizational hierarchy, I have a direct manager for Ashley, then we will even notify the direct manager that a task is overdue. And so now when I hit save on this, you know, I have something that's trackable, right? I can say, well, we're out of compliance on this. However, this was assigned to Ashley. You know, we have well, about 2 weeks left, right, before this should be fixed. And you know, so currently the status is on time, but it could also be overdue, etc. The other thing I can do is I can take a look at my environment. And I can say, you know what, this requires an exemption, right? So I'm going to go ahead and exempt maybe this resource. You know, or maybe I'll exempt the entire subscription, okay? Because I hit the checkbox next to the resource, it has by default selected this resource for me. And one thing here, you know, it's saying you can exempt the recommendation from any scope so it doesn't affect your secure score, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so there's good. Now, another important notification that I'm getting here, I showed you earlier that I had assigned not only the FedRAMP moderate compliance initiative, but also the NIST 800 171R2 policy initiative, and actually even the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. All three of those initiatives have this same requirement for container registries to use private link. So when I create this exemption, this exemption is going to take effect on all three of those policy initiatives. And that makes sense, right? It wouldn't make sense for me to say, well, I'm not going to create, or I'm not going to give this container registry a private link and a private endpoint for one policy, but for the other two, I'm going to do that. But that clearly doesn't make any sense. So this will, but it's just a good reminder, right? That hey, maybe you have a compensating control that's acceptable for the Microsoft Cloud Security benchmark, but maybe from a federal perspective, that's not going to be acceptable. So it's a good reminder that this may apply to more than one thing. So we're going to give this exemption a name. And if you recall earlier, I talked about the two categories of exemptions, mitigations, right? Which again generally mean that I have some compensating control in place, right? That perhaps achieves the same purpose as using private link, or I can use a waiver, in which case I'm just saying, look, this resource is out of compliance and I'm accepting that risk. Again, there is no technical difference between doing one or the other. This is really just for your documentation purposes, right? And you're definitely going to want to, create some kind of a description. Now, you can also see that you can set an expiration date, and the obvious use case for an expiration date on an exemption is to maybe say that, hey, we're in the process of becoming compliant, right? Because I've just assigned this to Ashley, right? And Ashley has to do this by the 3rd of August, I think, if I remember correctly. So maybe by the 4th of August, right, this exemption is going to expire. That's one way, and one good way to use expiration dates. Another good way to use expiration dates is to kind of force yourself to revisit those exemptions, right? It's not because today I feel like I can accept the risk of not using private link for this container registry that may still hold true, let's say, next year, right? Next year, maybe the external environment has changed in such a way that the risk of doing this has increased so much that maybe, I'm no longer willing to accept that. Okay, so I'm not necessarily saying this is a best practice, but think about, would we want to review this exemption at a certain point in the future? Now, there's two ways to do this. You can go through your list of exemptions on a regular basis as a matter of organizational practice and policy, right? And then evaluate them one at a time, right? Or you can set an expiration date 6 months, a year into the future, right? When that time rolls around, this exemption is going to expire, and this container registry is now going to show back up as non-compliant, and it'll be like, hey, red flag, you got to go look at this again. Okay? Whichever one works best, for your organization is something that you can use. So I'm going to go ahead and create an exemption here just to show you in a minute where we can review the list of exemptions. All right, so I've done a lot of talking again. I'm trying to keep also an eye on the chat. I don't see any new questions, but I appreciate Mohibul, you answering the question that Jeff had about the RBAC. There's no particular RBAC role to do this at the moment. So thank you very much for looking up and even providing the documentation link for that. Okay, so I've so far been working entirely within the Microsoft Defender for Cloud regulatory compliance environment. And so this is a great place to be if you are looking, to confirm your compliance or get compliant with one of these frameworks. Now, I don't want to overlook the fact, like I said, that this is all based on Azure Policy, and Azure Policy has its whole own area in the Azure portal where you can do many of the same things and frankly, a little bit more. So for example, when I go to Azure Policy on the left-hand side, the first, at the bottom, the first thing I see is definitions under authoring. And the definitions, right, they are going to show you everything that, first of all, is built into Azure, but you can also create custom policy definitions. And so it'll give you a list of any custom policy definitions that you've created. Of course, here I will also be able to create my own policy definitions and my own policy initiatives. Okay, so today is not a great day for me to get a good lot of luck loading oh, there it is. Okay, so there we go. And so you know, this is essentially, you know, just a small snapshot of the policy you know, definitions that are available. Okay, you can scroll down for a long time to see that. Of course, there's some filtering capability that is provided. You know, I could filter just for initiatives. They're generally organized into categories. You know, generally speaking, kind of by Azure resource type, but there's some, you know, some that don't necessarily apply to a particular resource type, but that have more to do with let's say guest configuration, for example, or you'll see here regulatory compliance definition types and so on. Okay, and I can also have a name filter, right? So I can just type in, if I wanted to find something that has something to do with storage accounts. Well, actually, I could use the category filter for that, but even by doing a search, you know, I'll find the policy definitions that are related to storage accounts. So this is a good place to get started, to look at the catalog and to find it. Then the other thing that I'm generally going to want to keep an eye on in my environment are all the assignments that I've made, right? Assignments of initiatives and definitions. So you can see, for example, in my environment, I've made 56 assignments. 40 of those are initiatives and 16 of them are individual policies. And then, of course, they are listed at the bottom. And like I mentioned, right, scope, you know, is an important part, because that's where the policy evaluation will start at that level, but it includes all the children. So you see here that I have quite a few of my assignments at the tenant root group. So what that means is essentially it applies to everything I have in Azure, but I also have a few that only apply to a scope of core resources, which, you know, in my case happens to be a management group. Okay, so there we go. And so if I click on one of these assignments here, that'll take me to the ability to evaluate my compliance with this assignment. Actually, sorry, not to view the compliance at this point. That's a different view. Excuse me. To view the details of this assignment, right? Where did I apply it? Are there any excluded scopes? Any exclusions? In this case, there are none. You know, what parameters did I provide? Do I have any overrides? Do I have any exemptions? You know, and things like that. So all the details of the assignment are available there. Now, what I actually meant to go into also was in the compliance framework. So again, when I go to compliance, I will see all of my assignments listed, but you can see it immediately includes here whether or not I am in compliance with that policy assignment. So if I drill down into the FedRAMP assignment that I have on one of my subscriptions, I'll get a little bit more details about it. And we will see momentarily here when this loads. Again, I'm not doing a very good job. I have 35 compliant resources, but out of 111 in total, you know, that's really not such a great thing. But I want to see the details, right? So when I scroll down, the first tab you'll see has to do with controls. And frankly, you know, again, for regulatory compliance, right, this is all about grouping them together in the language. In this case, you know, they call it domain and so on, and whether this is shared responsibility or Microsoft responsibility. So grouping it together in the language of the, in this case, FedRAMP moderate compliance framework. But also can see the individual policies, right? So I can see here, for example, that in order to be compliant, my storage accounts should use a customer managed key for encryption. And apparently I have 37 storage accounts that are in scope for this policy assignment, and there's 37 of them that are non-compliant. Okay, I can click through a little bit more, and that will then tell me exactly what those 37 storage accounts are. Okay, so this is how I can drill down. You know, I can also see in events, for example, whether you know, what is triggering reevaluation. You know, someone doing something manually. In this case here, there's some automation running on a scale set that is triggering events to happen. So if I click on my name here, let's see, this is going to go back to about a week ago. Yep. So you can see, you know, that some of the actions that I have taken have triggered audits of my resources. Okay, so lots of detail there that I can do. And by the way, if you really want to know what this means, there's also a description box available there at the end. Now, one of the things that I want to show you, and I'm going a little bit off script here, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time and not keep you very long. So there's a view definition button. There's several places throughout the environment. Here we're looking at, remember, one particular policy definition, right? That specifically wants storage accounts to use customer managed keys for encryption. And so sometimes you can read this title and even the description, and you're not 100% clear what is that actually looking for, right? This is a technical control. This is automatically evaluated. So how does it do that? Well, that's when you want to go look at the view definition. Now, the definition is going to be a JSON file. Well, it's not going to show me a file. It's going to show me JSON content here. And this JSON content at first can be a little bit intimidating to try and read, and I get that, but don't try not to be intimidated and power through it, and pretty soon you'll get the hang of things. At the very top, you're going to see properties and parameters. When you're first getting used to this, you can kind of skip through the section that starts with policy rule. Okay, and the policy rule, right, is going to tell you when a resource is considered, to be applicable for this policy definition. So in this case, the policy rule says, well, if all of the following is true, that the type of resource is a storage account. All right, okay, yeah, that's good, right? That makes sense because this is about storage accounts. And then it says what also needs to be true is that there should not, it has the word not here, not a key source for the encryption of the storage account that is equal to Microsoft Key Vault. Okay. So again, JSON, of course, is meant to be, a computer readable language, machine readable language. But frankly, if you look at the structure and you don't let yourself be too intimidated, you can get the hang of this. Now, I will admit that kind of by luck, I picked a policy that is, relatively short policy rule. There are policy rules that are significantly longer. They might take a little longer to fully understand. But, I think we can see once you take it one step at a time, you can understand why a storage account would be out of compliance. Number one, it's a storage account. And number two, the encryption key is not coming from Key Vault. Okay. And then it's saying, well, what's going to happen then? The then, again, could be more complex. But in this case, it's essentially just saying we're going to apply an effect. And the effect, excuse me, can be different things for different kinds of policy definitions. Generally speaking, you're always going to have audit, right? So it's going to say, hey, audit means flag this as being non-compliant. Other common policy effects that aren't available necessarily for this particular policy, but other common effects could be deploy if not exists. So if something should be there but it isn't, let the policy engine deploy it for you. Or another common one would be modify if not exists. And I'm almost certain that somewhere in the 3,000 plus policy definitions that exist, there is going to be a policy definition that is not going to have just the audit effect to check if a customer managed key exists for encryption, but that would actually modify the setting of the storage account to use a customer managed key for encryption. And that would be a modify policy, right? That would actually modify the state of that storage account. Okay, so I hope all of this made some sense here. I'm cognizant of the fact that I've been presenting for just about an hour, and I want to go ahead and wrap it up. We've done more than a quick peek. That's okay. I've got to show many of the things. I just want to wrap it up, go over a few of the concepts, right, that I wanted to talk about. The first thing is I've talked about policy non-compliance. We've kind of started digging into what you can do to get your compliance posture in order, right? But why would you do The answer to me is, why would you assign a policy and then choose not to be compliant, right? So, you should have that. Now, of course, there's more than that as a reason. And one of the most important ones, frankly, to me is this. If you have this policy assigned, okay, that says, actually, let me go back here, that says, hey, I want my storage accounts to have a customer managed key for encryption. And then you have a ton of storage accounts that don't have a customer managed key. And in the back of your mind, you're like, yeah, that's fine. It's not really that important, right? So you have a bunch of red, like I do, right? A bunch of red showing in your policy dashboard. Now, if something else changes in terms of compliance status, maybe something that I do really care about becomes out of compliance, I'm never going to spot this, right? You can see that out of 337 resources, if now all of a sudden a 338th resource gets out of compliance, or this percentage changes from 41 to 40, I'm never going to spot that, right? So getting to green is important, because if you get used to always looking at red, you're going to miss important pieces of that. The other piece, of course, is I showed you all of the neat little things that are built into Defender for Cloud that'll help you demonstrate that you're compliant with certain regulatory frameworks. Well, if you're going to spit out a report that tells your regulator that you're not compliant, that's not going to be very helpful, is it? So specifically what I'm talking about is going back to regulatory compliance. I can go ahead and let's see how quickly this is going to load here. I can go ahead and download a report, for example, for my FedRAMP moderate as a PDF file. Okay, we'll see. This shouldn't take long to generate. So I have a nice little report that is telling me an executive summary. There's a bit of red here, right? I don't want to show this to an auditor, right? Now, again, you might think, well, okay, sure, but maybe you're in compliance and there's just something that's not quite right with your compliance controls and so on. Sure, I understand, but there are 291 controls in FedRAMP moderate. If I'm not leveraging Defender for Cloud and this compliance report, that means I'm going to have to manually create a report that demonstrates my compliance with 291 of these controls. I don't want to do that. It's much easier to go in and fix my compliance stature in Defender for Cloud and use the PDF file that it spits out. All right. So we did talk about exclusions and exemptions. I kind of skipped over overrides. If you have a question about that, please feel free. In a minute, I'll stay on for a little longer if we need to talk about those. Now, those are the ones that I call the easy buttons. And I call them the easy buttons because it's important to remember that if you use those to get your compliance status to green, you haven't actually changed your compliance posture, right? But that doesn't mean you shouldn't use them. They can be tools as part of a compliance plan, okay? Now, compliance plan is going to involve your cloud governance team, and I don't want to go too deeply into that, but you're going to want to come up enterprise-wide. How do we get started if we have a bunch of red like I do? Well, you can start with low-hanging fruit, right? Fix the easy things first, make some quick progress, some quick wins. That's going to be pretty good. The alternative that you can consider is, hey, maybe you have some really critical workloads that really absolutely must be compliant, and start with those. And then so for each workload, cover everything here. Hopefully there's enough content on these slides that can help you understand what my approach is that I recommend when you need to come up with a plan for getting a workload into compliance. Okay, and we did look at the technical controls a little bit, at least, looking at the policy definition to see what it really requires. That's one of the important pieces that I wanted to make sure I covered. One other thing that is very important that I need to make sure I have covered here is the okay, so I'm going to see if I can get them to load a little bit more quickly this time. So the built-in policy initiatives that Microsoft provides for you as part of policy definitions, right, outside of the regulatory compliance feature in Defender for Cloud, and they do not require a paid Defender plan. Okay? So you won't get all the regulatory compliance features, but you can take advantage of the same compliance definitions in Azure Policy, and there's no charge for those. Okay, so hopefully this will load very quickly, because I do want to show you something that is important here. So I'm going to filter for initiatives. Okay, and so for example, okay, so here's the NIST 853 R5 built-in. It says built-in initiative, and I'm going to click on this, and there's tons of policy definitions that are included in here. As a matter of fact, 721 just in here. And so you might be tempted to say, hey, I like this policy initiative, but there's a couple of policies that I'm not going to want to worry about. And so maybe what you'll do is try and edit this definition. By the way, the edit button is grayed out for me because I didn't elevate myself to be a global administrator, so I don't have permissions to do this here. But the edit definition button, if I had the right role assigned, would be lit up. So you can go ahead and edit one of our built-in policy definitions. But I'm asking you to reconsider doing that. If you want to have your own custom version of NIST 853 R5, that's fantastic. Please duplicate the definition. And here is why. Once you edit the definition, you are no longer going to get updates from Microsoft. You can see that there's a version number associated here. 14.5.0 is the latest version of the built-in NIST 853 R5 policy. Once you start editing this definition, you're no longer going to get these updates. Okay, so that's probably not something that you want to lose the ability to do. So duplicate the definition, then modify as much as you like, right? Or use alternatives such as exclusions or overrides or exemptions and so on to exclude what doesn't apply to you. That was the point of this this slide here. Now, if you do, well, not if, when, hopefully, you do get to all green status for your regulatory compliance, this is still an ongoing process. So eventually, some people are going to deploy new resources. The regulatory compliance frameworks are going to change. They receive updates. So you're going to have to regularly review this. And of course, as these things change for your cloud engineers in your organization, you're going to want to continue to provide ongoing training on what those changes really mean. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was going to leave you with a great resource that is going to help you understand these built-in policy initiatives and the categories and everything else like that. It's a great website that is maintained in their spare time by a Microsoft employee. It's called AZ Advertiser, and you can find it at azadvertiser.net. And when you see this page, you can see it talks about policy. These are the definitions. It talks about policy initiatives, and it even goes further than that. If you want to see what a particular RBAC role is, even that it can show you. And perhaps the most valuable feature of this website is the fact that it tracks changes for you. So if I want to figure out, hey, what changed about policy definitions recently, then I can go ahead and load this site, and it'll tell me with the most recent change on top what has changed about policy definitions. They even provide an RSS feed that you can subscribe to if you want to get those change feeds in maybe some automated system or something like that. All kinds of filters are available to narrow that down. So this is an invaluable website for many things that are related to governance in Microsoft Azure. So take advantage of that tool. Okay, and that is going to be a wrap for me. I very much appreciate your patience as I was running a little bit late. Again, I'll be happy to stay on for a little bit longer and take questions and answers. But Bill, for now, I'll take it back. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sven. Excellent job. A lot to think about. You want? Does anybody have any more questions for Sven?
So I see Larry again. Excellent question. Is Azure Policy and Governance covered in depth on any of the Azure certification tracks? I can't say the answer. I don't know the answer for sure. I am going to say if it was covered anywhere, it might be in the AZ 500, which is the security one, or the new SC 100, which is the expert level security and compliance one. Probably mostly in the SC 100. Yeah, let me see if I could quickly pull up the SC 100 certification and see what's in that track. I haven't done that one yet, so that's why I'm not entirely certain. But just based on the name, I think that would be most likely the one that's going to cover it.
Yeah.
Let's see, skills measured. Does it have it explicitly mentioned in there? It talks about security best practices and priorities. It talks about design compliance capabilities. So the SC 100 is probably going to be the one that has it most in depth. Let's see, Mohibul says AZ 104. So AZ 104 is the Azure Administrator exam. I'm fairly certain the Azure Administrator exam is going to contain content related to compliance, but Larry, since you specifically asked about in depth, right? I don't think the AZ 104 is going to have it in depth. You know, AZ 104 does talk about Azure governance a bit, you know, but that's probably going to be a mile wide, but only an inch deep. So Larry, SC 100, I think, is going to be a best bet on that one. Okay, James, is there an Azure or Microsoft certification that teaches compliance administration? Well, okay, I think that's kind of the same question that Larry asked, right? Almost. So I think maybe James is more looking for the for a learning path. And so let me see if I can pull up the SC 100 learning path around compliance. Yep. So the very first module in the 100 SC 100 learning path for designing compliance is about designing solutions for regulatory compliance. Yeah, then there's a case study part of that. You know, the SC 100, I think, has kind of like case-based, I guess, exam questions. So, you know, don't overlook that if you're trying to sit for the SC 100. James, hopefully that learning path is going to be a good start for you. Again, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other ones, but there may very well be even better ones. So I'll do a quick search on the Microsoft Learn site to specifically look at regulatory compliance to see what's available. So yeah, there are, looks like there's at least one other module, learning module, that talks about evaluating regulatory compliance strategy. That, you know, specifically addresses the Microsoft Defender for Cloud capabilities, compliance scores, and recommended actions, and so on. So let me send you a link to the search results here, and hopefully this can be a good second resource to look into. All right. Hey, I want to thank everyone for the questions. I appreciate it. Certainly some follow-up questions about where can I learn more. So that's good. I hopefully stimulated your interest a little bit. Anything else I can answer?
Okay, if there's nothing else, then we'll wrap it up for the night. And this video will be recorded. Yeah, it's being recorded, and it'll be posted in the next few days. Unless there's more questions, we'll call it a day or a night. Oh, okay, Sven, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Bill, thank you for having me. Everyone, have a great evening, and I'll hope to be back soon sometime talking about a different topic. Bye-bye.
Okay, great. Take care.